Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Lifesigns, which is episode 19 of season 2 of Star Trek Voyager. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Voyager, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the second season episode Lifesigns. So Lifesigns is the episode in which Voyager picks up a Vidiian woman who is dying, and the doctor tries to save her life. In doing so, he creates a hologram to put her consciousness in, and she's a doctor who helps the doctor with her recovery. However, in the meantime, she forms a relationship with the doctor, and the doctor falls in love with her but has no idea how to approach the subject, and he at first does so terribly, but then he gets some hints from Tom Paris and manages to woo her. However, she then sabotages her own treatment, wanting to die because she doesn't want to go back into the ugly, deceased body. But the doctor then makes a plea for her to live out of love and convinces her to stay alive, and they dance together even in her diseased body that the doctor doesn't care about because he still loves her. So, one thing I want to start is not really, usually I start with my personal experience and my overall thoughts of the episode, but I just have something on my mind I just want to throw out there right away, which because it's something that I just discovered when watching this. So I watched this, as I do with most Voyager and Deep Space Nine episodes. I watched it on DVD because I have the DVDs, and I don't always have Paramount Plus. I currently do because Strange New Worlds is on, but even when I do, I still want the consistency with watching it on DVD because I have these physical copies and I kind of like physical media. And also, I would say that DVD is slightly better definition, I guess you call it, or not definition, because they're both standard definition. Slightly better quality, put it that way, visual quality than Paramount Plus, or at least I think so. I think there's been some online websites that say that as well. But anyway, so I watched this on DVD as I normally do, and it's funny because after I watched the episode, I had this song stuck in my head, the I only have eyes for you, because that, to my recollection, that's the song that was playing during the love scene when the doctor was wooing Danara Pell, I believe her name was, in the 57 Chevy parked on Mars, and so that song always comes up when I think of this episode. And after I immediately watched it, I was like, had that song stuck in my head and I was singing it. But then I watched a review of it that said that the DVD changed the song during that scene and didn't have I Only Have Eyes for You. It played a different song. I can't remember the exact, was it Prayer, I believe it was called. It was a similar genre and it was an actual song. But I had no idea. So I went back I was like, surely this isn't true, because I had the I Only Have Eyes for You song stuck in my head after watching it. So I went back, got my DVD out, watched that scene again, and sure enough, it was not that song. It was a different song. So then I went to Paramount Plus and watched that scene, and sure enough, Paramount Plus had the I Only Have Eyes for You song. So, for whatever reason, I guess it was a rights thing that they didn't have the rights for DVD, but they did have the rights for Paramount Plus. To me, it's wild that I still had that Only Have Eyes for You song in my head, and I was still thinking about it, and I didn't even realize that it wasn't actually in the episode I just watched. I guess I've seen that episode enough times with that song, and I still had that association with it that I automatically just thought it was the case without even thinking about it, which is interesting. And this is kind of the opposite thing happened with the Deep Space Nine episode Past Tense. And I talked about this before, how Past Tense played the Jimi Hendrix song Joe in the scene where Kira and O'Brien went back to the 60s and met the hippies. But in the DVD, on Paramount Plus, I guess they couldn't get the rights to the Jimi Hendrix song, so they just had a random guitar, like just random guitar music, and I was like, God, this is so terrible. And when I first watched it, I think it was Netflix at the time, but I first watched it on streaming, and I watched that scene. I was like, oh my God, what the hell is this? And then, so the opposite happened. I went back and watched the DVD, and the DVD had the Jimi Hendrix song. I'm like, yeah, that's how it should be. That's how it originally aired. It really, I think it's a really interesting exercise in how much music affects a scene. Like, how much better that scene is with the Jimi Hendrix song than it was with the generic music. And with the Voyager episode, it's why I mentioned that the song that replaced it was an actual song, because in the Past Tense they didn't replace it with an actual song. It was just random guitar music. It's probably like royalty free, just someone going which to me was crap. But so it wasn't as bad. What they did in Voyager wasn't as bad as what they did with removing the Jimi Hendrix song, because it was still an actual song of a similar genre. However, watching the two scenes back to back with the different music is interesting, because it definitely spoke to me on how one piece of music was much better and really enhanced the scene. And how much, I think people underestimate just how much music affects a movie or TV show, and just how much it does. Because I was watching an interview with Trent Reznor and Atticus, can't remember his last name, but the two always do these movie soundtracks together. Trent Reznor, of course, from Nine Inch Nails. And they talked about music being like another character in the film. And I absolutely, like, if it's done correctly, like, it can I think it's even more important than a character. Like, it's a overriding factor, because that I only have eyes for you song, like, just made the scene so much better, like, enhance it. I don't think I'm just thinking that because I was used to it with that song, because I've watched this episode on DVD before. Like, I've had these DVDs for like 20 years, so it's not like this is the first time I ever watched that song. I just never noticed it, because it didn't stand out for me that the I Only Have Eyes for You song stood out to me and like enhanced the scene. So I even thought it was there even when it wasn't there. So it does really show like how much music can enhance a scene. Now, I mean, the other song was okay. Like, as I said, it wasn't as terrible as the generic guitar music they substituted. It was a similar song, and it was still set the mood. It's just the I Only Have Eyes for You song set it way better and fit the scene so much better. Kind of reminds me of Donnie Darko, and I talked about this on one of my Patreon videos, where I talked about special editions or director's cuts that I hated, and I hate the special editions for Donnie Darko, because they changed the music, and a lot of it was because of copyright, because they couldn't get the rights for some of the songs, so they had to switch it out for different songs. And I think that almost ruined it for me. And I remember talking to someone who preferred the director's cut, and I was like, no, like, the theatrical version is just so much better. And one of the reasons I gave was the music. And they're like, oh, yeah, it's just music. I'm like, no, it's not just music. Like, music is a huge, huge factor in establishing the feel, the tone. I think is a bigger factor than almost any other element of filmmaking. I would say even more so than cinematography or art department or costumes. Like, to me, and maybe other people are different. Maybe other people, for them, costuming, maybe people in the fashion industry or whatever, for them that's more of a big deal and that's more of a focus for them. But for me, it's like the music is the major thing, almost more so than the acting. Really, or just as much as the acting would probably be a better. And that's why I always talk about music when I review, Star Trek episodes. I always mention the composers and stuff, which is speaking of which, this episode music was composed by Paul Balargian. Now, if you don't know who that is and you haven't seen me talk about him before, he is the composer who composes music for Star Trek, whom I don't like. I don't like his music. And it's funny because I didn't remember his music. I think I looked it up when I was looking up all the music episodes he did music for, and I saw this one. I was like, oh, I don't remember that, because I have fond memories of this episode because I really like this episode, as I'll get in shortly. And but as soon as I turned on the episode, like, again, I had the analysis mode on, but I did miss the whole fucking the song was different, so maybe I wasn't analyzing it that well then. But when I was watching this episode, as soon as I heard the music, I'm like, that's Paul Balargian. That is definitely Paul Balargian. Like, I can now, like, sort of, sometimes I get Jay Chataway mixed up with Dennis McCarthy, because sometimes Jay Chataway, I don't think, has a specific sound. Like, someone like Paul Balargian and David Bell, especially David Bell, like, I could immediately pick up on his stuff. But I think Jay Chataway and Dennis McCarthy can vary their sounds a bit, but Dennis McCarthy has this trademark, like, flutes that he uses, which is why he's my favorite composer, and I love his shit. And sometimes Jay Chataway can use flutes as well, and sometimes he can do good scores. So there's been a couple of times I've mistaken a Jay Chataway score for a Dennis McCarthy score. A few times, but usually I can tell the difference. And I do think Dennis McCarthy is actually a much better composer than Jay Chataway, but Jay Chataway is not terrible. Paul Balargian is. Like, I can't stand his music. I think and again, I was just talking about how music can heavily affect, like, is a very important factor. And I think there are some episodes that I don't like, that the first thing I think about when I think about that episode is Paul Balargian's bad music. And particularly thinking of episodes like Valiant or God, what's another one that's Children of Time? I know a lot of people love that episode, God, I think Waltz is another one that comes to mind. Now, Waltz isn't a terrible episode, but I just remember that music is just not good. I don't know how to describe it, but it's just bland. It just has, when I hear that music, I just feel like, oh, this is a boring episode, or this episode doesn't interest me. It's just, it has that gut punch of a feeling. Like, music evokes feelings. Like, Dennis McCarthy's music a lot of times can evoke strong emotions and push, like, the emotions very heavily. One of the biggest examples is Duet. I think the music is tremendous and a huge factor of what makes that episode good. Like, I think if you substitute Dennis McCarthy's score for Paul Balargian's score, I would like that episode a lot less than what I do like it. I mean, music can be a huge factor. And Jay Chataway, of course, did The Inner Light, which was an amazing score. So he can do some really good music as well. And again, if you substitute that for Paul Balargian's score, that episode would not be as good to me. I just, no offense to him, and maybe he's a really good composer when it comes to other things, but I just think his Star Trek music is just not good. It's just not good. It evokes the feeling of dullness, of this is boring, and oh, I'm not interested. I don't know. I just have that gut reaction when I hear his music. And David Bell, I don't think is nearly as bad. Like, I think he did have some good scores, particularly when it comes to Dominion War. Like, I just associate his music with the Dominion War. But the problem with David Bell is his scores do not vary very much. It's almost feel like they're just using the same exact music that he recorded in one session over and over again. But that's not true. There is a little bit of variation of David Bell, but not as much as there is with someone like Dennis McCarthy. So, but all that being said, the music didn't really interfere with my love of this episode as much. Maybe I would have liked it better if it had a Dennis McCarthy score. I'm almost certain I would, actually. Like, to be fair, there was that moment towards the end where the doctor was trying to convince Denora Pell not to kill herself. And the music was actually good in that scene. Paul Ballard, every once in a while, like Siege of 558, towards the end, he has that music during the big battle, and that was effective music, although proved it was trying to rip off Saving Private Ryan, but that's another story to tell. But anyway, the dramatic music that he played during the scene when the doctor is trying to convince her not to kill herself was actually good. It was actually powerful. Did evoke some emotions, which is maybe why I would like this episode better, or the score of this episode better than the score of some of the other episodes he did, like Valiant or Children of Time. But I still think it would be better. Like, the other parts of the episode that featured his, like, signature music, which again is hard for me to articulate, were bad. The music was. And so I do think it would have enhanced the episode had this score been done by Dennis McCarthy. But that being said, I still really loved this episode. So actually talking about the episode now, not just the music, I mentioned before that this episode I put it as my number one favorite romance episode in Star Trek. It's a video I did like 10 years ago. And I got a lot of pushback on that, saying, oh, you didn't put City on the Edge of Forever as your number one? That was my number two. But I changed my mind. Or at least, yeah, I put City as my number two because it's a good romance. It's easily the best Kirk romance in all of Star Trek. But it's not really the point of the episode. Like, the romance is not... It helps, most certainly, but it's not what makes that episode good. It's the dilemma, the moral dilemma, the time travel, all that is what makes the episode really, really good. Whereas in this episode, it's the romance specifically that makes the episode good. Now, I recently said, after I reviewed the DS9 episode Rejoined, that maybe I would change my mind and consider Rejoined the best romance episode in Star Trek. And I said I'd look at it when I get to this episode. Which one do I like better? It is so hard to say. They're like both really, really good. Regardless of which one I put at number one, I would definitely put the other at number two, so ahead of City on the Edge. Because, I was underestimating just how powerful a romance is. Because it's hard to say which one's better, because Robert Picardo has an amazing performance when he pleads with Dinar not to kill herself, but then Terry Farrell also gives an amazing performance when she pleads with Lenore Khan to revoke society and stay with her. Like, they're both really powerful episodes. I suppose, like, they both have not nonsensical, but inconsequential, that's a better word. They both have inconsequential B plots. Like, this one was like setting up Michael Jonas and the Paris being laid as shit. But Rejoin had the, let's create this wormhole, artificial wormhole thing, and it goes wrong, and Michael Eddington gets blown up in engineering, and Dax has to walk on the force field. Like, inconsequential side plots. They both have it. But I think the DS9 one is worse, or the rejoined one is worse, because it is more like just, it's there to eat up time, like a silly side plot. So, whereas this one, it's at least leading to something, is continuing this ongoing storyline, and it is setting up for the next episode. So I feel like on those terms, I would have to give Lifesigns ever so slightest edge as the best romance episode. But if I was judging just the A-plot versus just the A-plot, I don't know if I could choose. Like, maybe I would go with Rejoin. I don't know. It's fucking hard. Like, Rejoin also has that scene. It has two amazing scenes. It has the one with Dax and Lenara Khan, but it also has the one with Benjamin and Jadzia, which was fucking amazing. So therefore, I think I would have to give the slight edge to Rejoined. But that's if I was just looking at the A-plot. So if I considered the whole episode, then maybe slight edge to Lifesigns. It's fucking hard. It's hard to say. They're both what I would call some of the best romance, the two best romance episodes in all of Star Trek. Also, by the way, I would probably put Change of Heart up there. Maybe even past City on the Edge. But Change of Heart, amazing romance episode, but that was plagued by an absolutely terrible B-plot, so it wouldn't even be in competition between these two, but maybe better than City on the Edge. But anyway, so this watching this episode does make me think, and I've talked about this in the other reviews I did of season 2 episodes of Voyager, that just how much better season 2 of Voyager was than later seasons. And I'm really, because I talked before when I was halfway through season 2 about how, maybe it's not as good as I remember, but now I'm getting into the good stuff. And I'm thinking, okay, this is what I remember. This is why I think season 2 is one of the best seasons of Voyager. And this is why I firmly stand by that season 2 is much better than, I would almost said 4, not 4, but it's much better than 5, 6, and 7. And 3, of course. Way, far, 3 is the worst season of the show. I just baffled by anyone who says that season 3 is where this show got good. That's like, I could not possibly disagree with that statement more. Season 2 had that sense of community, that feeling, and a sense of character that later seasons, especially 6 and 7, lost. And plus, the Doctor, I love this exploration of the Doctor as kind of a new being who, you could say he's a child, but he's got, the intelligence of a super genius, so he's not really a child, but he does have this, he knows a lot about his profession and his job, and he even talks about that in this episode, when he says, before I met you, I was just a profession, and that's a really, really interesting character story. Whereas in later seasons, the Doctor is just an arrogant prick who is egotistical as all hell, and sometimes that can be a little funny, but sometimes they overdo it with that, and especially in season 7 they way overdid it with that, and so he's much more interesting of a character in episodes like this. And plus, something can be said for the fact that in the first 2 seasons, they didn't do that many episodes with the Doctor. Whereas season 7, the show turned into the Doctor Show with 7 of 9. It's the Doctor and 7 of 9 show. So, less is more, as they say. So when they focus less on the Doctor, when they do it and do a really good job of it, it stands out. Oh, so good. But when you get a Doctor episode every fucking week, you're kind of I'm sick of the damn Doctor. And plus, when he's being an egotistical dickhead that time. But anyway, so yeah, I do much prefer episodes like this. with the Doctor to later seasons, and I just prefer this season to later seasons, period. Other than season 4. Yeah, and I'm just thinking of people who said this is easily the worst season of the show. I'm like, the first 7 episodes, it took a long time to get started. The first 7 episodes were hard to get through. And then you also have episodes like Threshold and Tuvix and Innocence that come later. But even so, like, just the amount of, not just good episodes, but the feeling, that sense of community, even through the bad episodes, is just so much better. Yeah, because the romance in this episode was really good. Partly, yeah, because the Doctor didn't really know how to do a romance. Or how to handle himself in romantic encounters. However, they are forgetting about the episode Heroes and Demons in Season 1 when the Doctor had a romance with a holographic character. Now, granted, this is an actual living being, I suppose, but that's not to say holograms aren't living beings, but the ones in the holodecks are more NPCs. They're not like fully sentient the way he is. And she was in the body of a hologram, but it was an organic being. So it was, in other words, the character on the holodeck was kind of programmed to be into him, whereas this, wasn't. And how awkward that is. Like, I did think it was hilarious, this scene when he was doing the surgery and he's like, oh, so I'm now going to insert this into the prophetic nerve, and oh, by the way, I'm physically attracted to you, and I was wondering if you feel the same. And then Cass is just like, Doctor, maybe now's not the best time. He's like, no, Cass, I'm talking to Lenore. Cow, is her name Denora or Lenore? I can't remember. I'm gonna have to look this up now. Denora. It's Denora Pell. Okay. Alright. So it was interesting seeing the Doctor sort of, and I liked when he went to Tom Paris to get like feedback on it and saying, oh, how do you deal with being rejected by women. I love the way it's good like chemistry, good comedy in this episode. It was like, oh, I want to get your opinion as someone who's been rejected by a lot of women. I think the Doctor and his relationship with Tom Paris in later seasons, to once again harp on later seasons, is a bit more toxic, I guess is the word I'm looking for. It's a bit more like unhealthy and kind of uncomfortable, is like how the Doctor constantly insults Tom Paris. But here it didn't feel like that. It felt more of like there was just his social naivete sort of saying something that actually comes off as rude. And I loved like the comedy, the way they played it actually really worked. But no, Tom Paris, of course, once he hears about what happens, he's like, oh no, it was just your approach was all wrong. And I like how we're confirmed this in the scene that Denora has with Cass, where she's like, oh, I do, you do really like him, don't you? And she's like, yeah, I do. And you could kind of tell, like, it's something I can relate to as someone who doesn't always pick up on these social, interactions or signs. Like, in retrospect, when I look back in my life, there was several times in my life where a girl was interested in me and in some cases actively flirting with me, and I never knew it. I noticed it at the time, and I look back on it and I was like, God, you fucking idiot. A lot of this had to do with low self-esteem, which isn't the case with the Doctor. It was more of unfamiliarity with social interactions, although that was partly the case with me. But still, it's something that I can relate to, and also the way he just blurted it out and not knowing, socially when is the correct time to do that. Yeah, it reminds me of a time where I called up a girl and bluntly asked her, "Hey, you want to go out on a date with me?" And she was like, "Oh," just off put. She did go on the date, but nothing came of it because she just wasn't interested. But that's they always say, people who are extroverts will always say, "Oh, just tell her how you feel." Like that's what Kes says to the doctor in this episode, but it's never that simple. Like they make it sound so simple and make it sound so easy. And I think this episode again did a good job of portraying that it's never that simple or that easy, especially when it was very obvious that she had feelings for him, like in the previous scene where they were saying their awkward goodbyes before going to bed, but he just didn't have the sort of experience to recognize that was the case. So it's a very relatable romance, so it's very well written, and yeah, it's super realistic. And the actors do an amazing job portraying it. And so when they actually do finally hook up, like, it feels much more rewarding for the audience. It feels very heartwarming. And yeah, they do a great job gradually selling it. Too many of these Star Trek episodes, like Meridian is probably the most infamous one, but even some of the original series with Kirk, too many of them just fling them together and be like, oh, now care about them being in love, but you just don't buy it. Like, it just happens too fast, which is a problem with, the 45-minute episode format. And even some episodes like Lessons, they do take their time developing the romance, and actually do, like Lessons, they did a fairly good job at doing it, but this one I think was better because I was more interested in it, and I felt more emotionally involved or connected to the outcome of the relationship, and it was more rewarding when the two of them did finally get together. And then that leads to the whole storyline with the doctor or the scene where the doctor has to convince Dinara Pell not to kill herself, which was as I said, amazingly powerful scene. The actors did an amazing job with this scene. And the music was good, but it would have been better with Dennis McCarthy. But it's something. It gets into the topic of beauty being skin deep, and how some people are preoccupied with their beauty or their appearance and think that they're unattractive. As I said, I used to think I was very unattractive when I was younger, when I actually was, or at least to some people I was. But I had low self-esteem. I never felt that way, and it was kind of what Dinara Pell is going to. It's a bit different, because with her, she physically is what most people would consider unattractive because she's diseased or whatever, and has the, weird Vidiian shit going on. But it does make me wonder, because every Vidiian that we've ever seen on this show also looked like that. But she's talking about how healthy people don't want to be around her, and they look at her as like a monster. But it seems to me that all Vidiians are unhealthy. All the Vidiians have this disease, but whatever. And on that moment is interesting, seeing a Vidiian, like their actual appearance of what they look like without all the bullshit disease and shit. But it's interesting that she didn't want to go back to that life. She wanted to simply live the last few days of her life looking beautiful, and she also had this assumption that the doctor could never love her. And she tried to explain. Oh, when he tried to say otherwise, she's like, didn't believe him, saying, "Oh, you're lying. How could you love someone who looks this ugly?" And he explained his own personal experiences. Like, before I met you, I was just, my profession. That's all I ever was. You're the one. It's you. You are beautiful, not your appearance. And he meant it. And so that scene at the end when they were dancing together when she was back in her regular body, so fucking powerful because of it. It proves that he wasn't just having her on, that he meant it, that he didn't really care what she looked like, that he loved her for who she was. And it's just one of the best love stories. It's just such a good constructed love story to sell it like that. Now, it is undermined a little bit by the fact that these two never see each other again. Well, okay, one more time. They communicate over a screen one more time in one more episode, but other than that, they never see each other ever again. So it is undermined by that a little bit, but this is the nature of the episodic storytelling that Voyager does. We're lucky that we even got to see her cameo one more time. But did kind of undermine it. Would have made more sense if she would have more to look forward to if she stayed with the Doctor, but she's saying, "Oh, I have to get back to saving my people." I'm like, I don't know. I didn't really get that. But to me, it just seemed like an excuse for the writers to be like, okay, we need to get rid of her, so she's not a regular character. But anyway, so the other thing about this is that Denora Pell wanting to kill herself means that this is the second episode in a row that touches on the topic of suicide. And it's the fourth episode this year, the calendar year, because as I'm covering on my channel, Deep Space Nine Season 4 and Voyager Season 2 are airing at the same time. And Deep Space Nine had the episode Sons of Moog, which dealt with ritual suicide earlier, and then later in the season it will have the episode The Quickening, which touches on the terminally ill wanting to commit suicide. And then last week we got on Voyager we got Death Wish, which touched on the topic of just wanting to commit suicide because he no longer had the will to live. And then this week they touch on someone who wants to commit suicide because it was because they are ill and diseased and see themselves as ugly and undesirable. So 4 different aspects of suicide, but all in the same year. It's like, why was this the year where Star Trek really wanted to tackle suicide? I guess it was a bit topical in the mid-90s. I thought it was more topical in the late 80s than it was the mid-90s, but maybe it was still a bit topical by then. I don't know. But, I do find that interesting. And granted, like, the whole episode isn't about suicide. It's just this one bit at the end, but it's what the whole episode's leading towards. Because it's all about her finding romance and finding life and loving it, but not wanting to go back to the life she had before, and that she'd rather die than go back to that life of isolation, and she feels like that she wouldn't be loved in the same way, which the Doctor proves is not true, that he loves her for who she is, not just her appearance. So I liked all these episodes, except for Sons of Moog. I think that was dumb. But the rest of them, especially The Quickening, still say The Quickening's the best. But I like all these episodes that tackle this subject. As far as the Vidiian goes, that's another really interesting portrayal. I believe this is the first time we see the Vidiians in Season 2. I think this is the first time we've seen them since Faces in season 1, so we've only seen him twice before this episode. And it's interesting because, especially in the episode Faces, they were portrayed as kind of evil, hostile, and it's interesting that we see a woman who's just a doctor, who's just a normal civilian, and she even talks about how, you know, when people are scared of her a bit, she's like, yeah, no, some people in my society have let their fear and their anger get the better of them, and they don't consider, you know, the well-being of those that keep us alive. And so they make it clear it's not everyone in her society, it's just certain elements that were like rogue and out of control, and more had less morals, I suppose you would say. And that's I always love it when Star Trek strays from the race of hats things, and they don't say, oh, the entire race of aliens are like that, and they all have the same trait, they all are logical, or they're all violent or whatever. And I love when they subvert those sorts of things. So yeah, I mean, this really changed your perspective on the Vidiians overall. And then there was that one scene where B'Elanna was refusing to do the to donate part of it. He was talking about cracking into her skull to get a piece of her brain, but he's like, it's just a tiny piece, it's not going to make any difference to you, but it could save her life. And she was like very refusing. It reminded me of the scene from the TNG episode The Enemy, where Worf was asked to donate to Romulan and he outright refused. And so it seemed like a similar thing here. Both involved a Klingon refusing to donate to save a sort of adversarial race. And I think it didn't make a lot of sense, and you could see B'Elanna's perspective, especially after what they did to her in the episode Faces. And yeah, I think Dinara said, I understand you've been traumatized, and she's like, that's an understatement. But the way she was able to be like, look, I only want you to help me if you agree to it, because I understand and whatever. And she did it from a very sort of sympathetic point of view that made it very clear that she was different than the other Vidiians that B'Elanna encountered. So that was a very good scene too. Overall, yeah, it was just really well done. Now, the other thing I was going to talk about was the holodecks, because they're in Sandrine's playing pool, but then the Doctor goes on a date with the Norpel, and it made me wonder, is there more than one holodeck? Because I know on TNG there definitely was. They had several holodecks. I don't remember how many, but it was like, yeah, meet me in holodeck 3. So they had several, but that was a much bigger ship. And I heard some discussion online on whether or not there was more than one holodeck, but on Voyager. But I was like, there had to be. Because what did the Doctor kick everyone out of Sandrine's? And they seem to be having Sandrine's on like almost 24 hours a day. What if someone else wants to go rock climbing or some shit? So I asked the AI on Google, and they said that even though it's not confirmed, I think there are some episodes that contradict this, but it is in the technical manual, and some episodes state that there are 2 holodecks on Voyager, and that's what I'm going with, because that's the only way this episode makes sense. They use the holodeck anyway. Alright, so we also get the B plot. So it's now time to talk about the B plot. So it's now time for me to talk about Kenneth Biller, who wrote this episode. And full credit to him. As I say, amazing episode. The whole way that the romance is structured is so good. However, and I talked about this before in several other videos, specifically what he had to say about this episode. Alright, so Kenneth Biller, who wrote the episode. This is a quote directly from him from this handy dandy book of quotes. He says, "The idea of a story arc was done wrong. The mistake was a clear one. Michael Piller had this notion that we should tell a continuing story, sort of a la Hill Street Blues, LA Law, or NYPD Blue. But if you watch those shows, the continuing story elements are the character threads, the relationships. Somebody having an extramarital affair, and that keeps playing out through the whole season. The A story, whatever the big case was, gets solved. They arrest the bad guy, and these personal stories continue along. We did it backwards. I wrote this episode called Lifesigns. But that episode will never be a little gem because right smack in the middle of it are these two bizarre scenes with this guy sending messages off to Seska." So, I mentioned this in several of my other reviews before, how much I disagree with him. And that quote was put in the context of the book that I read it from, of why Michael Piller got pushed out of the writing staff in Star Trek. Now, to be fair, there's another quote from Kenneth Piller in the same book, a few pages along, that talks about how much he appreciates Michael Piller and how much he learned from him and how much he thinks he's an amazing writer, blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't change the fact that most of the writers, definitely including Kenneth Piller, went to Rick Berman and said, it's either him or us. And so for Kenneth Piller, this is one of the things he quoted as being one of the main reasons why he wanted Michael Piller to go, because he felt like he ruined his perfect little gem of an episode, which I don't know how old that quote is, but it didn't age well, because in modern television and streaming shows, that kind of storytelling is very common. It's par for the course. Having a recurring storyline, but you could have an episode that focuses on one thing in particular, but you have a recurring storyline that feeds out throughout the season, like Breaking Bad, which is generally considered one of the best shows of all time, did this. Other great shows, tons of shows, it seems, again, par for the course for modern day shows to do this. And yet he was bitching about it here, saying that it ruined his episode. His direct quote was, I wrote this little gem, or it's never going to be seen as a gem because right smack in the middle are these storylines with this guy calling the Kazon. So, my personal opinion, which I probably made very clear by now, is that this is a gem of an episode. It is an amazing episode, and most people do see it as an amazing episode, and the fact that there's a Michael Jonas storyline right in the middle of it does not detract from how an amazing episode that this is at all. In fact, as I mentioned before when I was comparing it to Rejoined, I like this better than just having a throwaway anomaly B plot crap, which is what people like fucking Kenneth Piller and Brennan Braga did in later seasons. And that's what they did in TNG, is like, oh, let's have this character story about a romance, but in order to create tension, let's do this bullshit anomaly thingy. And I'm sorry, but that's not fucking better than having... In fact, what they did by having this recurring storyline, now granted, they didn't resolve it very well, which I'll get to next week when I cover the resolution of the Michael Jonas storyline. I mean, if it had a better ending, that would have been much better. But still, it was an interesting through storyline. It made the world feel more realistic, more well-rounded, more like, and it made the characters feel real. And also, I disagree with what he's saying about, oh, well, in Hill Street Blues, it was just character story stuff going on. Well, I mean, so that might have been the case in the 90s. But you could do the same thing with like recurring storylines. And then plus it did affect the characters of Tom Paris and the other people. While Tom Paris had to, pretend to be dysfunctional at his job. In other words, I couldn't disagree with Kenneth Biller more. And I think that he was whining. And as I said, he's not a terrible writer because I love this episode. But he became the showrunner in season 7 of Voyager, which I strongly believe is one of the worst seasons, the second worst season of the show behind season 3. And he would go on to write all the bland bullshit that they would do in season 5 and 6. So, no. Michael Piller was way, way better than him. What he was doing with the Michael Jonas storyline was actually good, as is exemplified by the fact that that's what every modern day fucking show does. My God, that comment did not age well. Like, that's very common for them to have a through storyline. And how is that any worse than having a bullshit anomaly B plot? Because there would have been a B plot to this episode. There had to be. Like, there just wasn't enough material there to fill up the entire episode with the Doctor and Denora Khan. In fact, I think, or I'm getting the names, Lenora Khan is from Rejoin. This is Denora Pell. I'm getting the names mixed up. But anyway, there just wasn't enough there to fill the entire episode. So they needed to have a B plot. Why not have a B plot that continued the storyline with a Kazon spy, that made the Voyager feel like a real ship, that made this universe feel like a real universe, with the Kazon constantly being a threat even if they're not the main focus of the show, and also sets up perfectly the storyline in the next episode, granted not very good episode, but still sets up the storyline of Tom Paris putting on this act of being dysfunctional in order to sell the Kazon on the fact that he would be easily corrupted. And that makes, as much as I don't like the next episode, which I'll get into, it does make it so much better that they actually pre-planned. That's what made the first couple seasons of Voyager good. And I talked about this in the Seska episode of season 1, how they, instead of just having this character pop up out of nowhere, they actually planted her in episodes and established her before having her go. Like, this is good storytelling. And the whole bullshit, like, oh, he ruined my episode. The fuck he did! I don't understand why you think your episode would have been better off with an anomaly bullshit. In fact, I think the exact opposite is true. That the episode's better because it has a continuous, continuity-driven storyline which enhances all of Season 2 and the entire show of Voyager, because it makes it feel more lived in and more realistic. Continuity is always better, even if it leads to a stupid, dumbass storyline with Neelix doing a day, talk show or whatever bullshit they did next week. It still makes the season better. And granted, yes, I complain the Michael Jonas shit is just every week is just him calling up the Kazon, being like, oh, this is what's happening in the plot of the episode this week, and then it never comes up again. Fine. They could have handled that better. I won't argue with that. I will argue with having continuity is a bad thing. This is why people don't like Voyager. This is why Voyager did not live up to its potential. And even though I do really like this episode and some other episodes Kenneth Biller wrote, I do think he's a net negative. And that the show would have been better off with other writers. Especially when they made him the fucking showrunner of Season 7. But anyway, anyway. Like, I like the scenes with Chakotay and Tom Paris, so Tom Paris is constantly late. And it's just that one scene where Paris shows up late and Chakotay is like, that's fine. He's like, oh, I'm sorry, we're late. I'm late. And he's like, no, it's fine. That's fine. Don't worry about it. We're fine without you. You can leave. It reminds me of when I was in film school, because they had a rule that if you weren't on time for the meeting that they were doing for the film, then don't bother going in at all, because they're late. What was the saying that they had? On time is late. Means you had to be early. Everyone had to be early. You had to be on time. And it was disrespectful. And there was one time because I used to live like a 45-minute walk. And I used to walk to school because I didn't really have the money to take the bus every day. Sometimes I did when it was raining. But this day in particular, like, something happened where something got me caught up. And I ended up, having to walk, and it was raining and windy outside, and I showed up like 5 minutes late, and so I didn't go in the meeting because that's what they said. They don't bother going. And I remember when I was waiting outside the meeting, when everyone got out, they're like, "Oh, how come you're waiting out here? Did you just get here?" I was like, "No, I've been here for like an hour." It's like, "Why didn't you come in?" I'm like, "Because they have a policy." They said if you're not there on time, then don't bother. And I wasn't vital. I was just like transportation or something, so I wasn't a vital element to that meeting anyway. I mean, if I was, that might have been something different, but I don't know, maybe totally different, but that's what made me think of when Chakotay is like, "Oh yeah, don't bother." I don't know. I don't think I'd buy Tom Paris pushing Chakotay like that if I didn't know it was an act. Of course, we do find this out in the next episode. It is interesting hearing reviews from people, though, who haven't seen future episodes, so they don't realize that this is an act. Sort of trying to justify it and be like, "Oh, this is weird that Paris is acting that way." I think the Delta Flyers, Robert Duncan McNeil himself, is like this, because I don't think he remembers this is all just an act for that. So I do think I do like it. I like that it sets up the next episode, even if it's not that good of an episode. I love continuity. Continuity is always good, and Voyager needed more of it, not less of it. And that's also, again, why this silly YouTuber was saying, "Oh, well, season 1 and 2, I think he said season 2 in particular had no continuity, other than that Michael Jonas thing." What the fuck are you talking about? The Michael Jonas thing was the biggest sense of continuity this show ever had. It doesn't make any sense to exclude it, and even if you did exclude it, season 2 still has way more continuity than later seasons. I was just talking about Denora Pell and how she appears again. And they reference faces in this episode. There's just so much more continuity in these first 2 seasons than there was in the later seasons. Later seasons is just the alien of the week, 4-headed alien attacked the ship, and it never has any consequences going forward. They smash that fucking reset button as hard as they can. But anyway, I've talked about this a lot in other videos. So I would now like to thank all those that support me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. Just help me continue with the channel. I want to give a big special thanks to Jordan Johnson and Brandon Nealhouse. Thank you both so very, very much for your strong support. I'd also like to give a shout out to Tyler Cease, Benjamin Mead, Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco Chuck Hooks, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Manny Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Migalisio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So we do have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, "Lifesigns, more like strife signs. Mark, we've been over this. I am growing exhausted of explaining this to you. I'll say this again and hope this is the last time. Seska is my GF. She only loves me. I'm actually the father of her baby, not Cullen. That guy's a dork with weird hair. I'm super suave mofo with great hair. That's why Seska and I have something so special. From now on, when Seska is on screen, I expect everyone to avert their gaze and avoid looking at my girlfriend. Seska and I have something special. I give her 10 spoon heads out of 10. Seska plus Kyrie equals love. And love, by the way, Seska plus Kyrie equals love is all in caps. I think that's important. And what's also important, love is spelled L-U-V. I don't know. I'll try not to judge you for your weird obsession with Seska. As I said, she is kind of sexy. And yeah, I am hitting on your girl. Deal with it! But anyway. Next comment is from Benjamin Mead. He says, I've never cared much for this episode, but after watching your channel, I have paid more attention to it and have appreciated it more. The Vidiians really were a great alien race and gave lots of opportunities for good stories. I don't think this is the last time the Doctor not having a name comes up, but they do drop it after this for the most part. I was thinking it is odd for the rest of the show that no one asks the Doctor what his name is. It's pretty convenient. LOL. There are some episodes that when I think about them, a scene or certain image pops in my head, and for this one, it's the convertible on Mars. That's the first thing I think of when I think about this episode. That is kind of iconic scenery. Now, as far as the Doctor not having a name, yeah, it's funny they gave him Schmollis. I heard another reviewer pointing out that that's a terrible name. It doesn't really fit him, I don't think. It seems like a comedy, like Groucho or something. But I don't know. Maybe I'm being picky. But yeah, I've been on record before saying I think it's ridiculous they never gave the Doctor a name. They absolutely should have. But anywho, next comment is from Antarius, who says, I think it's strange that the ethical problem of the relationship between a doctor and his patient is never addressed in this episode. Certainly this should have been part of his program, but at this point when the Doctor wasn't able to leave sickbay, this scenario was maybe the only way to introduce a love interest to him. I know that you like this episode, but sadly we have to disagree here. The romance felt very natural, unlike most other romances we see in Star Trek, but it felt rather boring to me and I wasn't really invested. The ongoing storyline in Tom's fake misconduct is another example that Season 2 has at least some continuity in contrast to Season 3. The end felt very sudden. We don't see what happened to the rest of her time on board, and sadly we don't see him coping with losing her in the next episode. My rating is 6 out of 10. By the way, my rating for Death Wish as well as Meld is a 10 out of 10. Well, yeah, it's perfectly okay for us to disagree time from time. Because I think this is one of the most powerful romances depicted in Star Trek. And, okay, so as far as the ethical problem about him dating his own patient, it's funny because that thought never even occurred to me before. I don't know. I think they tried to soften that up by the fact that she's a doctor too. And I suppose that doesn't make it okay, but I don't know. I think that's partly why they introduced that. And also, I don't know. I give the Doctor some leeway because all he ever meets is his patients. Like, he's never going to meet anyone who's not his patient. So, I don't know. And as far as, like, that they should have shown what happened after the episode ended, like, I don't think it's necessary. I think that it's implied that they spent a lovely 2 weeks together. And that sometimes you got a scene that has a lot of implications you got to read between the lines, and it's a surrogate for other scenes that are unnecessary. All you really need is one good scene, and that dance scene was a very fucking good scene. It was a very powerful scene. Now, did we need to see the Doctor having to cope with losing her? That might have been nice. Maybe it's something they could have done in the next episode if there was any fucking continuity in this goddamn show. But anyway, we know who to blame for that: Kenneth Biller and his ilk. Anyway, next comment is from Ricky, who says, to me, this is one of the best episodes of the entire show and best romance episode in the show as well, and one of the best episodes for the Doctor as well. To me, this is such a personal episode. When I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to date girls until I finished high school, and at the time, I resented my parents for that. They wanted me to focus on my grades. Anyway, after high school, I finally could date, and there was a girl that I liked, and the way the Doctor acted, how he was inexperienced at first and would just outright say, I really like you and would want to go out with you, and do you feel the same way? While doing a medical examination is similar how I acted with my first crush, and Tom Paris and Kes helping the Doctor on dating was also reminding me of when my friends helped me when it came to dating and how to talk to girls. So long story short, we were dating for a couple of years until it was broke off. So this episode is very personal to me for that reason. Needless to say, an amazing episode that makes me both laugh and cry, so my rating is, of course, a 10 out of 10. Well, as per normal, we are on the same page. In fact, I said something earlier about my own experience. Now, the thing about Tom Paris helping the Doctor get romance reminded me of how whenever I had friends try to be like wingman or whatever, or so to speak, to help me get people, it never worked. I remember one time going out to a party at film school when I was in my 30s, and this guy was like, oh, we're going to get Mark laid, and of course nothing came of it. And then I had a friend, woman friend, who said that she would try to help me, be my wingman and help me hook up with, or whatever, get a girl. But no, she was terrible. She was not a good wingman. A good wingman does not insult the person you're trying to help. But anyway, but that's okay. It's a very relatable episode. I definitely see how a lot of people could relate to it, and how awkward you are with, any teenager really learning how to date. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, I usually hit my massive downgrade button with I don't care about canon Voyager. Both storylines are great. I prefer Tom Paris a little more, and both storylines actually blend together with the scene on the holodeck. Tom Paris giving some great advice to the Doctor. Writer room. Rick Berman walks in and all the writers ask Mr. Berman to fire Michael Piller as they don't like rechecking their work from previous episodes for continuity's sake. Jerry Taylor tells Michael Piller about a meeting they had about continuity, and most of them hate it. Michael Piller says, let them fire me because I don't want to work with these idiots anymore. I should have stayed on D Space Nine. So my rating is 10. I gave 3 episodes in season 2 a 10, and all 3 of them are in 4-episode run. BLT playing Gollum and Schmeagol again only gets a 7 out of 10. I guess you're talking about... Oh, you're talking about Faces. BLT playing Gollum and Schmeagol. Yeah, that was... I have a lot of issues with that episode. It's not a particularly good episode in my humble... In fact, I think I gave it a 4, if I remember correctly, so I was even harsher on it. I like how you come up with these little stories from time to time about the writers, kind of based off their behavior. I don't think anything exactly like that happened, but yeah, the gist was true. Is that Michael Piller should have remained in control of Voyager, and it would have been a much better show if they didn't kick him out. But again, this is something I talked about a lot already. Anyway, thank you, patrons, so much for your comments. So my rating for Lifesigns out of 10 is going to be a 10, the best. In the past, I've given this episode a 9, but I'd given it like really serious thought, like really hard thought, like after I watched it. I was like, because part of me wanted to give it a 9 again, but then the more I thought about it, I was like, the more I think about just how much I love this episode, just how much of an amazing romance, how emotional it is, how well the acting is. Granted, it could have had better music, but other than that, like the power of that ending of the Doctor begging Dinara Pell to not kill herself, and the commentary on beauty and it being skin deep, and also the relatableness of awkward first dates and how awkward it is, and if you don't know all the social cues and whatnot, it's very relatable, and it's just a well developed, like perfectly structured romance, and the fact that it has a B plot that is continuity is not a bad thing. Damn it, Kenneth Miller. It's a good thing. So, and it doesn't make this episode any less of a gem. Like, that's fucking ridiculous. This is still a 10 out of 10. Really, yeah. Really, amazing episode. So that is it for, my review of Lifesigns. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment below, tell me what you thought of the episode, and if you really want to support the channel, you could do so by supporting me on Patreon. There is a link to that in the description below, where I have different rewards for different tiers, such as being able to make these longer comments in my videos, pre-releases, and a series of patron-only videos where I revisit reviews that I've already done. Also, in that description, you will find a link to my Facebook and Blue Sky page. If you want to leave a shorter comment, you don't even need to be a Patreon supporter. You can just pop over to one of those, leave a small comment for me to read in my reviews, and I shall do so. So anyway, let's see what's coming up next on the channel. Next Monday will be my review for Investigations, and Thursday I'll be over on Patreon doing one of those patron-exclusive videos revisiting my review for the masterpiece, and this time I don't mean it ironically. This time I seriously mean it. Deadlock. Great episode. We'll be revisiting that on Patreon next Thursday, and then on Saturday back here on my main channel for a DS9 review, reviewing the episode Rules of Engagement, a not so good episode. But anyway, that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek Voyager and Star Trek Deep Space Nine and many other videos on Star Trek and other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.